An estimated more than 40% of the world population experiences anxiety, which can get in the way of you being your best self, living your life to the fullest, living your potential, and just your overall well-being. So today I have special guest, James Tripp, Jürgen Rasmussen, of course my wife, Julia, and we're going to get into this, and we're going to talk about, each of us, we're going to talk about the two things that have worked best for us in overcoming anxiety, but not necessarily just in our personal lives. We're all coaches here, we're all teachers, we've worked with people who have suffered from anxiety to help them overcome it. So I want to know from each of you, and I'm going to share mine as well, the best techniques you've used to overcome anxiety. All right, let's get into this. So James, let's start with you.
Okay, so anxiety is a huge thing, or has been a huge thing for me in a sense, in that that's what got me into NLP, basically. It's like...
I noticed you mentioned this, so we're, for those of you out there, we're in London right now at the UK Hypnosis Convention, and I got to say, I was a little surprised at your presentation when you said that was the reason you got into it, and then also when you were doing your street hypnosis. I used to watch those videos, and you were saying I was so scared, and I was like, I had no idea that you were actually experiencing anxiity.
Massive anxiety, and in a sense, part of the reason I was doing that, yes, I wanted to explore with street hypnosis, or hypnosis in general, but it was also about me. I was in a phase of my life where I was kind of recreating myself from the inside out, and I wanted to be living in the world in a different way. So that was part of my process for actually overcoming anxiety. I'm not a fan of that frame overly, but I'm going to use it. So, a really, really big thing for me. And one of the things I will say is a lot of people who may not have experienced anxiety might not appreciate how truly debilitating it can be.
Actually, I would like you to develop on that and explain how does it really feel to have anxiety?
Well, that's a really good question, and I think probably it's different for different people. So we use this term anxiety as if, well, that's going to be the same thing for everybody. So for me, speaking personally, when I used to get a lot of it was social anxiety for me. And I had a lot of fear around what people were going to think of me. They were going to judge me. They were going to think I was stupid. They were going to think I was unlikable, all sorts of things. The way that would manifest in me wasn't necessarily like a lot of oh my god, fear. It would be that my brain would start to shut down. And I've often said it's almost like, if you can imagine like a dental injection, like Novocaine or something, somebody had injected that into my prefrontal cortex and everything would go, and almost the sound would go a bit funny. And people would talk to me and I would be like, oh, and these single monosyllabic words would come out. And and the thing is, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because I was so afraid people would think I was stupid, and I would become stupid, right? That was the crazy thing about it. So it was just absolutely not serving me. It was getting in the way of my life in so many ways. I was having trouble at work when I worked, in organizations and things like this. It was difficult to communicate with other people. It wasn't so bad in the evening because I was drunk. That's how I would deal with it. But,
actually, I think there's a lot of people that's how they deal with it, and I don't even think sometimes they know that it's anxiety that's causing them to do that, but they know when they drink they can relax.
Yes.
And that's a generalized sort of social anxiety, and I think that's why a lot of people drink socially, just to relax into it.
Right. I mean, I was a very, very heavy drinker, and I don't actually think I was ever alcoholic, because when I finally sort of stopped drinking, and I used to drink every single day, I never had any problems or any withdrawal or anything like that.
As long as you don't go to meetings.
I just kind of transcended it because I didn't need it anymore. Now, so I kind of had two distinct phases, I think, in transcending anxiety. And the first of those actually is the phase where people go and they look at my old street hypnosis videos, that kind of thing. I'm in that phase, in that first phase. That phase was managing the anxiety. Right, so the stuff would come up, and I learned a lot from NLP about this. So I would get how is this? How am I manifesting this? What are the submodalities of it? And I would just start changing submodalities and using the tools to manage my inner states. A lot of state management stuff. And this was good stuff because it enabled me to do stuff that I had not been able to do before. It enabled me to stop or change this process when my brain would shut down, right? And there were other things I discovered about my inner experience from paying attention to it that enabled me to go, here's choice points here, I can take this in a different direction. But it was all very much managing stuff that was coming up. Then around about probably sort of 2012, something like that, I started to get into something that Jürgen's got a lot of familiarity with, this stuff, the three principles stuff, this kind of thing, looking more deeply into how my mind was creating the anxiety in the first place, instead of managing the products of what my mind was creating.
Did that give you some space from it? Just the fact that you start to say, okay, well, how am I doing this? How is this happening? Did that give you some space from it right there and help manage it?
I definitely, I think, like this is a thing for me that happened in stages. I do not regret. I'm not like, oh, I was completely on the wrong track with that NLP stuff. It's like, no, that was really, really useful stuff. There were some other things as well that really helped me. So I worked with a guy called Steve Chandler. And Steve Chandler's quite a well-known author. He's got a lot of books. And he's a coach. And I had like probably a year's coaching with Steve Chandler. And Steve was a real wizard of reorganizing people's reality. And I had this really interesting experience. If I can tell this story right now, I've got like a minute or so to tell it. When my kids were really young, we used to go to this place called, what was it called? It was a place where there were like really tall trees and they had all these rope bridges between the trees and slides that would come down. Bewilderwood, that's what it was called, in Norfolk in England. And I had a terrible fear of heights as well. Aside from my anxiety stuff, I used to have a really bad fear of heights. I couldn't even go up on a step ladder to change a light bulb without really going to a state. NLP was really good for this as well. I couldn't even look at somebody in a high place without really starting to go into a state. NLP really helped me with that. So I had these tools to manage it. So I would go with my kids to this place, Bewilderwood. We'd cross these big rope bridges between these tall trees. And I'd know as I was going up the staircases up these trees, like, right, I'm going to have to start doing my state management stuff any moment from now. Right, okay, I'm going to start reversing the spin on the feelings and this. And I would be able to cross these rope bridges and manage to do it and keep my state. And I was working with Steve Chandler. And I've been working with him for like 6 or 8 months. And honestly, this is just general coaching. Nothing about fear of heights had ever come up at any point. And we went off for our usual summer trip to Bewilderwood. And we're going up this thing, and I'm going, oh, yeah, I'm going to need to start doing my state management thing soon. I'm going to need to start doing it. And we carried on, and in a minute, and my kids are distracting me and everything. And then I suddenly realized I was halfway across the rope bridge, and I didn't have to do anything to manage my state. And the fear of heights had apparently disappeared. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. I feel absolutely fine. And I'm in a high place, and that never happens. And I was thinking about it a lot after, what happened? Because we never worked with fear of heights, but what Steve did with me is he helped me kind of like get an entirely different sense of myself and who I was. And what my theory is with this is that fear of heights just didn't fit with how I saw myself in the world anymore. And because it didn't fit, it just disappeared.
Now you're swerving into my lane, the self-concept stuff.
Right, yes, it was very, very
like
much.
That one.
Right, it was totally, because we had done a lot of it, not the same process, but it was working at the level of self-concept. Steve always used to say self-concept is destiny. Right, so that transformation of self-concept, instead of working on the fear and the anxiety, we never touched that. Just the self-concept change meant that dropped away. So like, I'm a big appreciator of the power of self-concept work. So yeah, that was kind of my second phase, then getting into the three principles stuff. And now somebody was saying to me just after my talk yesterday, do you have any?
Is that the first technique? Let's summarize that if it was.
Sorry.
No? Okay, we're still leading up to it.
Yeah, so I had the NLP phase of managing what I would call the products of, maybe Jürgen would talk about it in terms of your thinking. So let's say my thinking is creating stuff for me. What the NLP stuff helped me do was get some distance on that and meet that differently and work with that differently. But then later on I kind of got into this phase of maybe more self-concept stuff on one level, but also a sort of re-rendering of the kind of nature of reality and experience as well, which helped me really, I just kind of fell out of it all. Somebody was saying to me yesterday, do you still get any anxiety now? And I'm like, I don't think so. I mean, maybe a shadow of a shadow of a shadow of a shadow.
And I think if you have to think about it that hard, there's a good chance you really don't, and if it does, it's probably at such a small level
Yeah,
that
I
it's
might
not
get
a
some
big
reluctance to do something. Like I might not feel like it. Like if I'm going and presenting, I might go, I don't feel like it this morning, but it's not a big deal, and I'll just go and do it anyway. So
I want to get you're going to jump in, and I want to go around before we get to the second one. But how would you summarize that as a technique if you were explaining this to someone how to do it?
So if I was going back to the first stuff, let's go for the first stuff because it's the easier stuff to talk about. For me, like that was very much getting in touch with the quality, well, like what is actually happening. Instead of being caught up in, there's the camera, being caught up in the anxiety, it's like how does it manifest? How is it showing up in my experience and in my body, right? And then at that point, it's like, oh, it's showing up that way. And what choices do I have about this? Right. So there's a process to how it comes on, and people that know NLP will know about stuff like spinning feelings, this kind of thing. So, like for example, that brain numbing thing that I would experience, I could feel that coming on, so I could just kind of reverse it, or I could feel something coming up in my body, and I could just kind of reverse it, you know. And there were some other things I discovered about this. I'll just say this quickly. I used to, in social context, do what the improv theatre teacher Keith Johnstone calls habitual low status behaviour. Right? I would play low status, and it's a way of going, I mean you no harm, right? And when I realised I did this, what I was able to do is get the kinesthetic of it, how it's represented kinesthetically in me, and feel it, and then just adjust it up so I was like more in a one across position, and that really helped me in my kind of social interactions as well. It's like really submodalities work in a way, often working in the kinesthetic system.
I think a lot of people would say, well, yeah, I know what you're talking about, and as it's coming up, but I can't do anything about it. But I think the key to that is sort of understanding that it's coming up as a process, and then when you can sort of observe it like that, then it gives you that space, and then once you have that space, then you can have more control over it.
That's really important, that space. And I think, like we were talking in a previous conversation about how NLP was originally called meta. And meta means being able to kind of go up above it, and I think that making the space, being able to hold those feelings and sensations as object rather than being subject to them, is a major piece.
Absolutely.
That actually not just is useful in doing the techniques themselves, it actually gives you a skill that can generalize out into other areas.
I used to use exactly that, where anxiety and fear is probably just a very nuanced difference between the two, but if I would experience fear, that's how I would deal with it, but it works the same way with anxiety, of course.
Yeah.
What about you, Jürgen?
What are you asking specifically?
First technique, whether you've used it in your personal life or you've used it with clients to deal with anxiety.
Well, I think the first thing is to see that there's no such thing as anxiety.
I knew you were going to say that.
Right? Yeah. I mean, sometimes clients come in and they say, we have a terrible relationship. I'll say to them, how are you relating in a terrible way? And they either start laughing or they kind of get taken back. And I say, look, relationship isn't a thing. Language makes dynamic processes look like things. Relationship isn't a thing, it's a process. So how are you relating? So when people say to me, clients say, I have anxiety, I say, no, you don't. There's no such thing as anxiety. Now, you may be anxietizing, or you may be phobicking.
Which puts the person back in control.
Not control, I don't buy into that one. But or they say, I suffer from depression. And I say, well, you may be depressing or relating to
Whatever
your
you might control, they're the actor now, rather than the receiver or just the
So depending upon how they conceptualize, I may emphasize having choice about that or not, depending upon the client. But I think the first thing to kind of see is that, wait a minute, this isn't a thing. This is actually a process. And once people see that this is kind of something that I'm doing or constructing or a way I'm engaging with experience, that opens up for the possibility that I could engage differently. So that's kind of the first thing to sometimes I task my clients by saying, I'm anxietizing now. And it's such a pattern interrupt because, but if you're anxietizing, you can kind of do something different. That's kind of the implication of it. I think the second thing is, I got this from Albert Ellis. I'll say to clients, look, if you're anxietizing, you're demanding something. You're either demanding something socially about how other people perceive you or how you come across, or you're demanding that you must perform or show up in a particular way. And I think the structure of it very often is, if you demand something, either I must not feel this, or I must not be perceived this way, or I have to be in control, or I have to perform. If you demand that, and you simultaneously are bright enough to know that you don't have that guarantee, then every time the thought comes up, there's going to be a fight or flight response. So one way I've kind of done it with myself and with clients is, whenever you notice that type of response internally, to kind of stop and go, what am I demanding right now? So in a social situation, I often say, this is interesting too. If you ask a client who says, I'm socially anxious, and they say, I want to be confident, right? You ask them, what's it like to be socially anxious? Meaning, what is it that you're experiencing that you label as anxiety? And they might go, well, my heart's beating, or my palms are sweaty, or I'm nauseous, or I have this internal dialogue. People give different responses, right? But if you ask someone who seems confident, and I've tried this, what's it like to be confident? They usually can't really give a coherent response. It's not a specific feeling, or it's not like, it's more, I'm just doing my thing. I'm just present. I'm just in life.
It's kind of like when you drive your car to work, and you don't even remember getting there because you're so confident.
You're just doing your thing. So I say to my clients, I say, look, the main difference, I think, between the socially anxious person and the quote-unquote confident person is that the socially anxious person is having one or more conversations more. Meaning, the person who's comfortable is just having the conversation. There's just the conversation. The anxious person is having conversations about the conversation, about how they appear and how it. So they're just doing more work. In a sense, and one thing I try to get my clients to see, which I think is largely true, is that if you're socially anxious, you're demanding something of the other person. You're demanding that they perceive you in a particular way, for you to perceive yourself in a particular way, right? So to the extent that you can give another person the freedom, I'll say freedom in quotation marks because you can't really give them the freedom, but to the extent that you can give someone else the freedom to perceive you however they perceive you, you're free. So anxiety then becomes a kind of useful signal to go, I'm holding someone hostage in my mind again. I'm demanding that they perceive me a particular way. And what I try to do with clients, instead of helping them get rid of their anxiety, I do my best to help them cultivate their willingness. Like, how willing are you for the thought that someone thinks that you're boring, for example, to appear? How willing am I to have this beating heart, or this perception of myself as awkward? And the more willing someone is to have that experience, the less resistance they tend to have. So I tend to kind of work on that level. I'll mention one more thing too, if that's. And when I said there's no such thing as anxiety, the interesting thing is, if I ask someone, I'll say to them, well, anxiety is not a feeling, it's a label, it's a concept. They might say, well, I feel hopeless, but that's not the concept. The label is referring to something. It's referring to something you're experiencing. What is it that you're experiencing that you're labeling anxiety? One person might say, oh yeah, my heart just starts beating really fast and I get sweaty palms. And I say, that's it? And they go, yeah. So I'll say, so when you feel sweaty palms and beating heart in a particular context, you label that anxiety, and they go, right. Another person might go, I just get really dizzy, my chest gets tight and I can't breathe. Another person might go, I get this cold, chilling feeling suddenly. Like, there's overlap. But people basically take neutral, and they may be uncomfortable sensations, but they kind of take sensations, and depending upon the context that they're in, they can make different emotional states out of them. So for example, in one particular context, so if someone says, oh yeah, my heart starts beating and I get sweaty palms, I'll often have them sprint on the floor in my office for 30 seconds really fast, and then have them describe their experience. And more often than not, they go, yeah, my heart's beating really fast and I have kind of sweaty palms. I say, right, how anxious are you? And they go, not at all. And that's often kind of where they realize, oh, I can have this and not create anxiety around it.
So I'm curious, if you explained to clients the fact that there is no such thing as anxiety, and explain the entire thing you mentioned here, did you have clients that just by repositioning that entire thing, they kind of already improved and overcame it?
Yes. A lot of what I do is psychoeducation, just helping people understand the mechanisms, just help them. I've had so many people kind of go, now that's kind of strange. And something else too, final thing, which I think is very interesting, is people often have this idea that anxiety protects me. It's a protective versus, a nice analogy is if you have virtual reality goggles, turquoise virtual reality goggles, and you go outside, the cars and the people and the sky is going to look turquoise. It looks as if you live in a turquoise world. But it kind of tells you about your goggles. It tells you about the goggles you're wearing. And I think that's an important distinction to get. This is a mind state. This is a particular, it doesn't necessarily tell me that much about the world, but it tells me a lot about this particular mind state. And I remember when my son was born, because even with people who say they're anxious, if I ask them, have you ever been in a life-threatening situation? Like someone has a knife to your throat, you lost control over the car. It's not like I'm on the plane and it could crash. It's like you're actually running out of the burning building. Some people do say, yeah, I panicked, I froze, but very often people say, no, I was calm, or super focused, or my senses, I heard everything. They very seldom report anxiety. They might report anxiety after the fact when they think about it or when they anticipate. So to help people see that, wait a minute, during times of actual danger, they very seldom have that response. There's something else kicking in. And I remember when my son was born, he had this virus infection, and then he got another one, and that was kind of, I don't know how life-threatening it was, but he was in and out of the hospital with a breathing mask, and it was kind of, and my mother-in-law is a medical doctor, and she's kind of neurotic. She has a tendency to worry and anxietize, and my wife has a tendency to kind of worry and anxietize. And what I would notice is that every time something was actually up with my son, they would just act. They just went to the hospital. But then I would see my mother-in-law kind of with tears and being anxious around my son. I would say to her, Ellen, you look kind of worried and anxious. And she'd go, yeah. I was like, let me ask you, are you seeing something right now that warrants medical attention? Should we take him to the hospital? Or are you thinking? And she'd go, yeah, I guess I'm thinking. I'd go, great. I'd go back to my book. So I'd be super relaxed. Every time they were worried, I'd use that as my cue that they're not seeing anything. They're just thinking. That's my cue to kind of relax.
I'm curious, whenever you mentioned that they can use anxiety as something to protect themselves. So with people that use it as a mechanism to protect, whenever you remove anxiety, do you have to replace it with something else so they still have the protection? Or is it something that can just be removed and it's just empty and it's just gone?
I don't think so. I mean, I looked at some statistics a few years ago, the 10 most common fears, and then the 10 actual causes of death. And the only one that was in both categories was fear of viruses and bacteria. This was pre-COVID. And you had tuberculosis and influenza as the 8th leading cause of death. And those were the only ones that kind of correlated. Other than that, there was no resemblance between the things that people say that they are anxious about. And I sometimes like to use the example. I say, look, if you go home and let's say Damon's cooking, on the stove.
Yeah.
Let's say it's cold outside, you're freezing. You don't go and put your hands on the stove to warm them up.
Yeah.
And the reason you don't do that is not because you're anxious. It's not like you see the stove, you feel anxiety, you move towards the stove, you get really anxious, and hadn't it been for the anxiety, you would have put in your. You just
Yeah.
need the knowledge.
Yeah.
Or if you have kids and you're by the traffic stop, the green light, like. I don't have anxiety. I know that if I move into the street with my 5-year-old son, we're going to get killed or injured.
Yeah.
But it's not that I have this anxiety response that stops me from walking out into the streets. I'm completely calm. I just know to not do that.
It's almost like basic logic.
So a lot of the time to me, it's about helping people to kind of uncover that they often have these assumptions that they somehow need to worry to prevent making mistakes, or if I think about this enough, I'll solve this. And I remember when my wife was in a serious car accident. It was in a coma and stuff like that, and various friends would come to the hospital, but sometimes we would meet friends after the fact that would come up and go, I've been so worried about you, you've been on my mind all the time. And I'd look at them and go, like, they've never been to the hospital. Like the people who were at the hospital, they didn't act that way. They were just present. And I think for a lot of people, worry and anxiety serves a function of feeling that they're engaged in doing a lot while actually not doing anything but spinning their wheels.
Yeah.
Well, I think actually anxiety, I don't think you need to replace it with anything, because I think if anything, anxiety removes you or removes your access to resources. What I often say is, like, what is a resourceless state? If you had a state that was completely resourceless, what is that? Well, I can tell you because I've tried it. I experimented with that, and it induced panic in me. And that's why they say don't panic. Does one create the other? I'm not sure which one comes first. But if you're experiencing anxiety, rest assured you have lost some access to resources.
Yeah.
And when you don't have anxiety, you have more full access to your resources as you need them. And as a result, you're probably going to make better decisions in a tense situation or a crisis situation.
Yeah.
So my first technique that I want to share is very similar to what you were saying, so I'm going to kind of piggyback on that. But before that, I want to say kind of what inspired this podcast and this topic is because we kept getting questions in our group coaching group about anxiety. And I was like, my mind kind of went blank on answering that. And a big part of it was I haven't experienced it in so long. The only anxiety that I've experienced, it was interesting that what you were saying about it's when you're demanding something that isn't available or you can't control. And the only time I experience anxiety has to do with when we're trying to catch a plane and we're late, or where something where I'm late and I can't speed things up. And then I like the way you say that. It's like I'm demanding that I be there on time, but I don't have full control of being there on time. That's really, and it's not a major anxiety. It's just sort of like, I want to just be there. So I don't really experience anxiety that much anymore, but I absolutely did, especially social anxiety. And for the longest time, I couldn't get up and talk to a group of people in public. And I went to Toastmasters to try to tackle that. But the one thing that I've heard that I think is one of the most useful, and it really fits with what you were saying, is I heard Sam Harris when he was not in philosophy mode or political mode, he was in neuroscientist mode. He said, what goes on neurologically when you're experiencing anxiety is almost exactly the same as when you're experiencing excitement. The only difference is where you shift your mind focus. So if you're shifting on focusing on everything that's going to go wrong, well, not only are you going to experience anxiety, you're kind of future pacing yourself to do exactly the thing that you don't want to do, because that's the information you're paying attention to. But if you shift your focus to, well, I'm excited because I get to get up and talk to all these people, and it's going to be great, and I see myself performing very well, that gets even more exciting. So you're sort of taking that what's happening neurologically and moving it in a different direction.
Yeah.
How does it work when you're trying to catch a plane and you think you're gonna miss it? Are you getting excited? I'm gonna miss the flight. I can't wait.
Knowing you, because she's so positive and optimistic all the time, she would find that exciting. Oh, now we get to tackle a new challenge. How do we find a new flight? So yeah, that's my main technique. And my other one, I'll just wrap up real quick, and then we'll move back to you, James. The boundaries work in self-concept that Steve Andreas teaches I kind of overlooked that. I was really focusing on the 90% of the core of self-concept, but there is that other piece of how much do I sort of own the space around me. And then when someone I don't know steps into that and basically crosses my boundary, how do I feel about that? And do I feel like, I'm being violated in some way?
Yeah.
If someone, and so we actually do that. We imagine, a stranger is getting closer and closer, and this is a stranger who's not, looking, like they're trying to hurt you or anything like that. It's just how close will you allow a stranger to get to you before you go, whoa? And that's how we start to code what is that imaginary boundary that we create around us. And we call it imaginary, but you can see how it affects people when you step into their personal space and they don't know you, like, they kind of jump. And so it may be imaginary, but we actually feel it, and it is anxiety inducing. And when I met her, she was walking down the street downtown, it was broad daylight, and I wanted to meet her, and I felt like anxiety coming up. And what's so strange about that is, she was 20 years old, she's this tiny woman, but I'm feeling fight or flight feelings come through me. But I remembered the boundary work, and I was like, okay, I'm going to drop the boundary entirely. And so because I was well acquainted with it, I was able to do that. And then suddenly there was no fear, there was no anxiety, and I just walked right up to her and started talking to her. So I hate to think that if I had not done that, I experienced all this anxiety and I just let her walk past, I wouldn't be married to her today. So we miss those opportunities, and I want to hammer that home too. Is like, well, why are we even talking about this? Anxiety is crippling. You miss so many opportunities when you allow the feelings of anxiety to stop you, and to stop you from taking risk. And I think a lot of this is driven by self-worth, which I talk a lot about, which is a bigger subject than we want to get into right now. But I think a lot of anxiety is people's belief that they have this thing called self-worth, which does not exist. You can't measure it, and they think that if I go and do this thing and I look stupid or I take this risk and I fail, then somehow that lowers my worth. And it's like, but there's no such thing, and you can't be measured. So there should be no anxiety about that. You're still going to be you. You're still going to wake up the next morning, and everything's going to be fine.
Yeah. So that sort of dovetails nicely into.
I think that we had completely planned all this. Huh?
Yeah, I think there's a good chance that there's going to be resonance here, because what we're dealing with is something that has a reality to it. You see what I mean? It is built a certain way. It is constructed a certain way. So I think that anyone who's kind of working effectively with anxiety, like the more effectively you work, the more you're likely to be finding your way to the root of it. So one of the things that I often share with clients is that, like, anxiety, like a frame I play, is like all states have recipes. Right? There's a recipe for everything. Anxiety is a recipe, right? And I often do this little bit with people. I say, you're like somebody who's a great baker, bake great cakes. I've just walked into the kitchen. There's a gorgeous chocolate cake there, and you've got an apron on, and there's flour on you and everything. And I go, this is a great cake, and I go, nothing to do with me. Right? So I kind of like introduce this idea that there's a recipe, that they're baking up the cake, but then saying they're not doing it. So I want to get them to see how they're baking the cake and what it's kind of like put together. So like, if I'm dealing with something like social anxiety, I mean, there's lots of ways. I'll use lots of different approaches, different methodologies, different metaphors, that's what I'm trying to say. But they're all kind of pointing in the same direction. Now, one of the things I'll often do, a little bit of business I often do with people around social anxiety, is I make a guess, and it's an educated guess, and it's almost always right, that what they're really afraid of is some kind of judgment about self, right? There's something that they fear might come out of that social situation, a judgment by the other person upon them, or a judgment that they made themselves upon themselves. And that's going to be about, like, what if something terrible about me is true? Some awful horror about, like, and for me, I know this for myself, one of my big things is what if people think I'm stupid? Because my real fear is what if I am stupid, right? And like people see it, oh my God, that would be awful. Which relates to this thing you're saying, my self-worth will drop. It will be terrible. So one of the things I often do with people, and I've had some really big shifts from this, is I say to the client, I say, look, I want you to, you can see me right now, I want you to get into the worst thoughts you can possibly think about me. right? Just judge me harshly in your mind. Really get into the reality of seeing me in the worst possible way you could. What a terrible person I am. You know, what are the worst things you could think about me? Sometimes I'll see it. I work in Scotland, and I said this to a guy in the clinic. I said, you know, really judge me when you dirty English bastard. But you know, I get them to really judge me. You know? And then I say, okay, so just shake that off. And I always do it this way because, you know, you've still got an ego to protect. I say, no, think like great things about me. You know, what's the best stuff you can see in me? So really be in that reality of seeing all the best you can in all of this and thinking about it in a good light. And so as you went through that experience, do you think anything actually changed about who I am? Right?
That's nice.
And they're like, I go, like, did I actually change? And they're like, well, oh, I guess it's okay, that's good. Because I'm going to do the same thing to you right now. Okay? And then I go, so right now I'm judging you really harshly. So just be aware that I'm judging you really harshly. And maybe somebody will squirm a bit there, or maybe they'll be calm, and then I go, no, I'm seeing you in a very positive light. I'm seeing the very best of you. Did I change you? You know, and I get this thing going on. So I start to introduce people to the idea that the judgments that they fear so much change nothing about who they are, right? And I really emphasize this point: change absolutely nothing about who you are, right? And I'm aware when I deliver this, I'm also working on a level of state because I want to draw them into a state of calm and being able to be with stuff. I'm a big believer in I love the phrase, what you cannot be with will not let you be.
Whoa. Say that again?
What you cannot be with will not let you be.
Okay, I'm pretty sure I got it, but can you give me an example?
So what I mean by this is if I fear that I might be stupid. Now, stupid isn't even a thing. It's an idea, it's a concept. It doesn't exist in the world, right? Other than stupid is and stupid does.
I knew you were going to say that.
Like,
Forrest Gump.
You know, but it's a concept, it's an abstract thing, so it's not like a real thing as such. But if every time I think that I might be stupid, or I think that somebody else thinks I might be stupid, I get a reaction in my body, one thing I know damn well is I'm taking that idea really serious. I'm not seeing that it's this idea that doesn't really have any substance in it, right? I'm falling for it. I'm mistaking a thought for a fact, right? So if I can't be with that, if I can't be with being stupid, then it's going to haunt me. I'm going to run from it. Every time I think that judgment might be laid upon me by somebody else or by myself or whatever, I'm going to start reacting. So really, I want to be able to go, yeah, I'm stupid, right? We're all fucking stupid, aren't we? Excuse my language. But, I mean, you know, because we all do stupid things, right? Like,
and we're all ignorant of something.
Yeah, we're all ignorant. There's a variety of different ways in which I could be considered stupid by a whole array of different people, and I'm probably going to screw up a dozen more times before the day is out. So, yes, I'm stupid. What a gloriously human thing it is to be stupid. So I'll often do stuff like this with clients. I actually get them to get into a sort of empowered ownership of the stuff that they might fear. Right, so on the one hand, I might empty it out, like there's nothing to it, it's stupid, it's just an idea. But on the other hand, I might fill it back up again with this sort of sense of like, yeah, I'm stupid, I'm an idiot, what a gloriously human thing this is to be a fool, you know. And so that people have this kind of like, actually it's okay. There's nothing to be afraid of here. The thing that I've been running from, that I've been escaping from, I'm with it right now in a different way. So I'll often kind of pull these bits and pieces out. And this for me develops what I would often call a different ground of being. So all the little threats, all of the unconscious ideas, these things that we've reacted to, it's just like, actually, it's just shit, it's just stuff, it's just flowing through, I'm okay. You know, with all of this stuff, I don't change, I'm okay. Right? And I have had people going, oh, but I wouldn't want to care, which is kind of like, you know, this point about the stove. You know, and one distinction that I often bring in around this is like, before COVID, when I had a lot more people come to my office, which is at home, people would have to cross this busy kind of intersection bit. And I would often say to them, I say, so you crossed the intersection on the way here? And they say, yeah. I said, were you terrified? No. Were you afraid at all? No. That's a pretty busy intersection, a lot of cars there. How come you're here and you're alive? Is there an issue crossing that road? And they're like, no, there wasn't. It's just you didn't really need fear or worry or concern to like do what you needed to do to cross the road. And like, no. And I point out that anxiety or fear or whatever does nothing to protect them. What actually protects them is their ability to coordinate in the moment, you know, their awareness, their resources are what protect them, not their anxiety. So, and I will often point out that worrying is not caring as well.
That's a really great distinction.
Right.
That's a great distinction.
You know, like
it's kind of what you were saying about the hospital.
Yeah. So I point this out, like, if you're really to care about somebody means to really be able to bring an attention to them and be aware of their needs and all of this, and like, can you really do that if you're caught up in worry? Right? Are you really attending with a higher level of quality and care to what you're doing if you're worried? And like, that's quite useful for people to get that distinction between worry and care, because I've heard that, you probably heard that, well, I don't want to not care, I don't want to be somebody who doesn't care.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, so a lot of this is, to me, it's getting into the recipe. How do they create this? What are they doing? I totally agree with Jürgen. It's these resistances, and we're probably coming from the same place, but maybe approach it slightly differently on how to get people to be able to be with all that stuff that they've been pushing away. Or
You mean you wouldn't do the provocative things that he does with his clients?
I know it can be a little bit provocative from time to time, but like, even then, I think your method is a lot less provocative than it used to be. You've shifted your gears a bit. Some degree.
Gotten older.
Yeah. But also I think your kind of framework and where you're working from and your set of understandings is maybe different from perhaps when you were doing more of the provocative stuff.
Yeah.
But I think
it depends on what you mean too by provocative. Like an offer a quick. Like I worked with a woman who had fear of heights, and there's this mountain in the city that I live in that I sometimes take these fear of height clients on journeys, in the mountain. And she had a leadership position, and it was pretty like ambitious and competitive, and she liked being outdoors and stuff like that, and liked nature, and she broke down like 30 meters from the top. And was just crying, and why can't I do this? And Jürgen, to tell me why am I afraid? And she was just like really. I said to her, well, let's just call her Janice. I said, Janice, I kind of know, but I don't know if you'd handle the truth, to be honest with you. She looks at me and she goes, of course I'll handle the truth. I said, well, you like nature, right? She says, yeah, I love nature. I said, do you believe that nature contains wisdom? That in the presence of nature, you can often, have discoveries and epiphanies about things. And she said, right. I said, isn't the message obvious? She was like, what do you mean? I said, you're attempting to get to the top. This is clearly a metaphor. It says, you don't belong at the top. You kind of belong down here. I think your purpose, Janice, is to make other people shine and to lift others. And I think this is nature telling you that you don't really have it in you. You don't belong up there. That's what these feelings are. And she started laughing, and she was kind of angry, and she was laughing, and she was like, fuck you. Like she had this, like, and she stubbornly, was kind of crying and laughing and working up, and then she was like 5 minutes from, or 5 meters from the. I just grabbed her hand, I just pulled her up, and it was this great moment of victory, right? I think a major element in that was also me as the helper. You could say that I cared about her in that I was present and kind of did my job.
And you were provocative in the sense that you provoked her.
I provoked her. I provoked her identity. I kind of tried to make it inconsistent with. But I also kind of showed her that I'm not scared of these feelings. Like, in a sense of I'm not taking them seriously in the sense of them meaning anything. And I think, by all means, I think that we evolutionary have certain hunches, that if you were by the elevator later tonight and some dude shows up next to you and you suddenly get like a cold fear sensation, I trust that and not go into the elevator with that guy, right? Even if you don't have like a reason. I'm completely in for that, or in for that we can have, resonance in things not feeling right, or not feeling right. Simultaneously, I think a lot of this is also about learning to not take our emotional states so seriously.
Yeah.
And not adding so much significance to them and looking for meaning and analyzing. And I'll give you an example of this with me. Like I'm easily moved and touched by things. So my kids tease me. So we just went to this like Christmas movie thing, right? Which is kind of like, it's a very nice story. And I will start crying. Like the tears are just, and the kids are just laughing. They think this is like embarrassing and like you're so pathetic in the sense of look at him, and I'll be like, oh fuck, there's this thing going on again. And then simultaneously, and this might be a personal failing in a sense, even though it's completely impersonal, I can be deeply moved by a fictional story. Then I can turn on the TV, look at like the thing in Israel and Gaza, and intellectually process that and go, yeah, that's horrible, but not really have a felt connection to it at all. And there was something about that kind of gave me an epiphany of like, this emotional system is kind of misguided in a sense. Like it offers up a lot of like, but there's no reason to necessarily take it that seriously.
Right.
And just as James talked about, it's all about self.
You're in my lane.
Yeah. So one thing I often ask clients when they say, I have these thoughts, and I have these horrible thoughts or feelings. I say, are they your thoughts? And they always say yes. And one client with a sense of humor said, well, Jürgen, it's me and you in the room. It's like, so yeah, you got a point. But look, I see clients from all over the place, Australia, New Zealand, the States. I've had hundreds of people tell me the exact same stories and thoughts. They all claim ownership of them. Like, isn't that fascinating? And they go, well, yeah, I haven't quite thought about it that way. And I said, not only that, how old are you? And let's say they say 40. I said, right. You notice that these thoughts and feelings are way older than you? Like, do you read? Like, if you read books, you'll notice that people have these thoughts and feelings hundreds of years ago. And according to, like, linguists and anthropologists, symbolic language might be 65 to 80,000 years. I have no idea how they figure those things out, But tens of thousands of years. I said, is there any other aspect of your life where you go around with a straight face and claim credit for things that were around thousands of years before you were born? I'll say, imagine you and I were friends and we're into old cars and we're at this museum. There's this car from 1937, right? I suddenly say, hey James, it's my design. I made that. I was in the...
Yeah, I invented the question.
I invented the whole... Here you go, Jürgen, you were born in 1977. Like screw those pesky details. Like this is my... Jürgen, you're tripping. Like, this is not thinking well. Like, people don't do this with other stuff, but they take thoughts and emotions that are thousands of years old, and with a straight face, they claim, this is me, this is mine, I'm the architect behind it, and therefore it says something horrible about me. And that's why, regarding the whole kind of like Gaza thing and the not feeling anything, I have zero stress around that, in the sense that it looks completely impersonal.
You talked about that with the thoughts, and that you think those are your thoughts. I've totally used that with clients. Ever since you told me that, I totally use that with clients, and just the look on their face when you say that, they're like, okay, tell me more. What do you mean by that? And I go down that same path. I'm just like, it's like this weird thing that we tend to want to possess whatever we think is coming from within us.
Or even the I need approval thoughts.
Exactly.
Like, is that yours?
Yeah.
Like, how personal is that?
I remember...
it's like the most impersonal thought ever. And like, you're claiming credit for it. Like, getting them to see the humor and the absurdity and the of some of this stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's where the artistry lies. I think provocation can be that. Humor, confusion, absurdity.
Yeah.
It's such a slippery slope, though. Like when my daughter was born, I started getting these weird images and had weird dreams of like bad things happening to her. And there was a part of me that said, well, that must mean I'm a bad person for even having these thoughts. And then I was like, whoa. And I had to put a stop to that, because if you start going down that path, then you start really believing, you start making generalizations based off these things. Like, no, there's probably some part of me that's really afraid of something happening to my little innocent daughter who can't do anything for herself. And if I start owning that and generalizing about that, where could that take me? I don't even want to know where that could take me. So it was just, I remember putting a stop to that and saying, no, these things are coming up, and that's just how it's happening, and it really says nothing about who I am or any generalizations I can make about me or anything in the world.
Yeah.
It's just there. That's it.
Yeah, I think that's like a really important thing, and that's in Ellis's work as well, if I remember rightly, that, not taking things and writing them into your self-image, thinking that's just something about who you are. You spilled the coffee, that means I'm a idiot because I spilled the coffee, or something like that. Is recognizing those stories of self. They are stories of self, and they really don't say that much about who we are, only something about who we think we are. So I'm often emphasizing that with clients. Whatever you think you are, you're wrong. Like I use that I think Korzybski used to say, use that line, whatever you think you are, you're wrong, or whatever you think it is, you're wrong. Right? And kind of getting people into that. But getting people, I think one of the things that you do, and I do, and probably you do as well, I know Jürgen's work more than I know yours. I think this comes from kind of the NLP sensibilities, or hypnosis sensibilities. It's you're talking about doing psychoeducation. So I think that my approach could be characterized in a similar way. But I'm also aware that in that psychoeducation, what I'm looking to do is bring people into a certain experiential relationship with certain aspects of their own thinking, their own ideas, their own thoughts. And so there's a quality to that experiential relationship as well. So there is an attention to state and being. It's not just like, these are the ideas, get the ideas.
It's where the artistry comes in.
Yeah.
And I think also, since we're at a hypnosis conference, I think one of the strengths of hypnosis in quotation marks, or a hypnotic procedure with someone, is kind of this attempt to help someone like embody a perspective. In a sense, like can you not only have an intellectual idea about something, but can you have like a felt, embodied realization of like, oh shit, I just saw something new. I just had an epiphany, and that artistic, James does this extremely well. This ability to use language and intent and be grounded and guide someone through a process where they can slow things down enough to kind of embody or have an experiential realization.
Right.
I think it's the goal.
I have a theory about this, and I suspect that this will resonate with you. Like years ago, I had this client. I can't remember what we were working on even, but I recommended a book to him because I was just hearing how he was speaking and how he was talking about his world and everything. I'm like, man, this book's going to like blow this guy's mind. It's going to completely shift his reality. I can't even remember what the book was, but I'm like, read this book, I said to this guy. And he's like, oh yeah, I read that, great book. And I was like, what? You read that book? Because it didn't make sense that if he understood this book or got anything from this book, it didn't make sense how he was now making sense of the world. And I was like, that's weird. Like, how could he have read this book and say it's a great book and yet not get some of the really important stuff in this book? And I had this I really thought about this. I had this realization that when I read, I try on what's being offered. Like, I don't just kind of like go, well, that's an interesting idea. I'm like, how would it be if that were true? How would I be if that were true? It's like,
well, you're modeling. You're NLP
right,
modeling.
Right. And maybe this comes from NLP, and maybe it comes from like being trained in that sort of way of doing things. But I kind of really get into it and really try on that reality. And I recognize, and it kind of makes me a slow reader sometimes. Like, I'm not the fastest reader around this because I'm really like, I want to get this and I want to get into this. And how does this impact me? And I think it's a very transformative way to read. And a lot of people don't do this. They're not like trying on the ideas. They're just sort of like, yeah, it's interesting. There's one thing like, it's a little bugbear of mine, it kills me if I'm working with a client. They go, that's food for thought. No, that's not.
Yeah.
You know, I know I've not brought them to that place, if you see what I mean. But I think once you're aware of that as a facilitator of change, you've got some acuity for that, whether somebody's really trying on what you're offering, whether they're really inside of it. That is such a valuable thing to have. And I always say when I'm teaching people to facilitate change work, stop trying to get through the process and get into each moment of the process and get the client into each moment of it. Because so many people, when they might learn, like, well, here's a protocol for dealing with anxiety, and then they're trying to get through the protocol to the end of it, because they go, right, when I get to the end of it, then the change will happen. Right. And it's like, well, everything happens in the moment, in how that moment comes alive. And I think that's something that, like, when you're doing your psychoeducation, you're not just doing, it's not an informational psychoeducation. Right. It's an invitation.
Experiential.
Yeah, into different experiences.
And there's something else you're pointing to as well, which I think is so essential and easily forgotten in change work. It's like, it's less what you say, it's what the client hears. It's how they make meaning out of something.
The meaning of a communication is the response it gets.
Right. Like, I remember one of the first time I went to see a movie with my wife. This was before the days of the take-over breathing. I apparently had, we saw this thing that was kind of, I can't even remember what it was, but kind of creepy, right? Some sort of scene. And I had gotten into a mode of heavy breathing. And she rises up like offended and stunned and just like, for heaven's sake, is this turning you on? And she's so offended that she leaves the cinema. And everyone's kind of looking at me, right? and I'm sitting there like I was not turned on at the least. Like, but so I got curious because I was like, what the hell? Just like something's lost in translation here.
Yeah.
I went out there and I was like, what the hell? Like, how did you? Well, you were breathing heavy. It's like, right, I may have been, and that means it's like, oh, so that's what she heard. Like, that's what she made out of that, right? That was not my experience. Not my experience at all, and that's why I in terms of books, there's this saying like the author starts the book, but it's the reader who finishes it. Yeah. It's whatever they hear from the book is going to be their experience.
Right. And I know for myself, when I'm reading, I read with the intention of getting something that's going to enhance my life. Yeah. That's going to give me a different way of seeing things, which is generative. So I'm kind of sorting for that and trying stuff on, and like some of it might be like, yeah, not so much that, but this is really interesting.
And just for the viewers out there, what Jürgen does with his psychoeducation, he's not training psychos. That's not what you're doing.
Psychoeducation.
Yeah. So what do you think, guys? Did we crush anxiety in this past, what is it, an hour and a half?
Hopefully not. We hopefully embraced and explored and saw something new.
And maybe transcended.
Maybe transcended.
Maybe transcended.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Any last thoughts before we close this out?
Not really. I would just say to anybody watching this, if they are experiencing what they might call anxiety and they feel like it's kind of holding them back, it is utterly, like I often say to clients, I say there's something I know about you that you probably don't know about yourself. And they're like, well, what's that? And I say, this thing you're experiencing, you can totally transcend this, right? And I mean that absolutely sincerely. And they often don't know it themselves. They wonder, is it possible to get beyond this? And then I'll say to them, like, there's a reason that I know this. And it isn't because I know you really well, but I do know that you're a human being, right? And like, some people out there think, well, and I often say this, can I use stronger language on this, or would you prefer that?
He's already done it.
He's already done it. I often say, and I know you probably think you're some special case of fucked up, right? And everybody goes, yes, at that point. They all think they're a special case of fucked up, but nobody is a special case of fucked up. We've all got basically the same kind of neurological hit.
We're all normal cases of fucked up.
Yeah, like Stephen Gilligan often says, you're an incurable deviant. And like we're all going to be gloriously imperfect in a variety of different ways for the rest of our days. But whatever it is that you want to transcend, there is a way through that. So like if anyone's out there and they're going, oh, this anxiety is really screwing me up, I know what that's like, and you can totally transcend it.
There's always a way out. We're not only meaning-making machines, which can get in our way sometimes, we're learning machines.
Yeah.
So we can learn our way out of this.
Yeah.
We learned our way into it, we can learn our way out.
Right, powerfully adaptive. That's another diagnosis I give people regularly, is powerfully adaptive mammalian brain. You know.
Well, before this gets too noisy, because people are coming in here, we are in the middle of a convention. We should probably close this out. I just want to thank you both so much for taking the time to do this. I know there was other things you could have been doing during this time, but I'm really glad you showed up to do this, and I always enjoy really having these conversations with both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.